The stormy night. The rain poured relentlessly over the small town of Willow Springs, a quaint community where life usually moved at a tranquil pace. But tonight, tranquility was a distant memory. The downpour painted the streets with a glassy sheen, and the occasional rumble of thunder echoed ominously. At Maplewood Park, a shadowy figure stood under the dim glow of a solitary street lamp, shivering against the storm's chill. Richard Hale, a wealthy businessman known for his sharp mind and sharper tongue, checked his watch impatiently. His tailored trench coat was no match for the storm, and his scowl deepened as he flicked water off his expensive cufflinks. Hale's reputation preceded him: ambitious, ruthless, and entirely untrustworthy. But tonight, the tables would turn in ways he could never have predicted. Late again, he muttered under his breath, the glow of his cigar briefly illuminating his weathered face. A second figure appeared from the shadows, moving with practiced confidence. The brim of their hat obscured their face, but their expensive leather shoes and the firm grip on a black umbrella betrayed a certain air of importance. "You don't like to wait, do you, Hale?" the figure said, their voice smooth but edged with menace. Hale sneered, tossing his cigar to the ground. "Time is money, and you're wasting mine." The figure stepped closer, the storm momentarily quieting, as if nature itself were holding its breath. "We need to renegotiate." Hale barked a laugh, shaking his head. "Renegotiate? You've been paid more than you're worth. Don't push your luck." But the figure remained unfazed. They stepped into the full glow of the street lamp, revealing a sharp gaze that pierced through the rain. "Your arrogance will be your downfall," they said, their voice growing colder. Hale scoffed, but his bravado faltered as the figure produced a wrench from beneath their coat. Before he could react, the figure lunged, striking him across the temple. Hale crumpled to the ground, the rain washing away the blood pooling beneath him. The figure worked methodically, wiping the wrench clean and carefully placing it in a plastic evidence bag engraved with a name: Jack Carter. Then they dragged Hale's lifeless body to a nearby trash can, stuffing it inside like discarded refuse. As the figure disappeared into the shadows, the only witnesses were the rain and the distant hum of thunder. The following morning, the quiet of Maplewood Park was shattered by the scream of a jogger who had stumbled upon the grisly scene. Police swarmed the area, their radios crackling with grim updates. Detective Reed Barker arrived, his expression grim as he surveyed the scene. The body had been discovered in a trash can, the head wound evident. Nearby, officers found the wrench in its plastic evidence bag. Reed studied the engraving on the handle. "Jack Carter," he murmured. "The handyman." An officer nodded. Neighbors said Hale and Carter had an argument last week, something about unpaid repairs. Reed's jaw tightened. "Bring him in." At the edge of town, Jack Carter's small workshop buzzed with activity as he worked on repairing an old rocking chair. The sudden knock on the door startled him, and he wiped his hands on a rag before answering. "Jack Carter?" a uniformed officer asked. "That's me," Jack said, his confusion evident. "You're under arrest for the murder of Richard Hale." The words hit Jack like a freight train. "What? No, that's impossible. I didn't." "Save it for the judge," the officer interrupted, snapping handcuffs onto Jack's wrists. As Jack was led away, his 7-year-old daughter, Emily, watched from the window, clutching her stuffed bear tightly. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't make a sound. Instead, a fierce determination began to take root within her small frame. The news spread like wildfire. Jack Carter, a well-loved handyman, accused of murdering one of the most powerful men in town. The wrench with his name on it was damning evidence, and whispers of guilt quickly replaced words of support. Emily sat in the living room that evening, her bear still clutched in her arms. Her father's empty chair loomed large, a stark reminder of the life that had been upended. Rachel Miller, a close family friend, knelt beside Emily, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Sweetheart, your dad is a good man," she said softly. "We'll prove he didn't do this." Emily looked up, her wide eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. How? Rachel hesitated but finally answered, "We start by finding the truth." Little did they know, the truth was buried under layers of lies, corruption, and danger, and uncovering it would test their courage in ways they could never imagine. A web of lies. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Jack Carter sat at the defendant's table, his wrists shackled and his face pale with disbelief. The small-town courthouse was packed to capacity, every bench filled with neighbors, reporters, and curious onlookers eager to see how the trial of the century would unfold. Emily Carter sat in the gallery beside Rachel Miller, her small hands gripping her stuffed bear tightly. Her wide eyes darted between her father and the imposing figure of Judge Edwin Kane, who presided over the case. Judge Kane, a tall man with a commanding presence, had built a reputation for being no-nonsense and decisive, but something about his cold, detached demeanor made Rachel uneasy. As the prosecutor laid out their case, the evidence seemed damning. Jack's fingerprints on the wrench, the recent argument with Hale, and the lack of an alibi on the night of the murder. Rachel felt her stomach twist with frustration. None of it felt right, but the prosecution's narrative was polished, leaving little room for doubt. In the back of the courtroom, Rachel noticed a man with a camera snapping pictures of the proceedings. His disheveled appearance and the sly grin on his face made her uneasy. "Who is that?" she whispered to the woman sitting beside her. "Charlie Burke," the woman replied in a hushed tone. "Local tabloid journalist. He's been digging up dirt on the Carter case since the arrest." Rachel frowned. Jack didn't need another person smearing his name in the public eye. She turned her attention back to the trial, her mind racing with questions. Why was the evidence so perfectly damning? Why did it all feel staged? That evening, back at the Carter home, Rachel pored over old photographs, invoices, and repair logs from Jack's workshop. Emily sat beside her, silently coloring with crayons. The room was quiet except for the occasional scratch of pencil on paper. "Rachel." Emily's small voice broke the silence. "Yes, sweetheart. Do you think Daddy's sad?" Emily asked, her eyes brimming with tears. "I think he misses me." Rachel's chest tightened. "I think he misses you very much, Emily. And I think he's scared. But we're going to help him. Okay. We're going to bring him home." Emily nodded, her lips trembling. She slid a drawing across the table, a picture of Jack holding her hand outside their house. Rachel smiled faintly, her heart aching for the little girl's unwavering faith in her father. As Rachel continued her search through Jack's belongings, her eyes landed on a stack of repair receipts. One, in particular, caught her attention. A job Jack had completed for Richard Hale just weeks before his death. The invoice was unpaid, and Jack had scrawled a note at the bottom. "We'll follow up next week if not resolved." Rachel's mind raced. This was proof of the financial dispute the prosecution was using to paint Jack as a vengeful handyman. But it was also the first thread of a larger mystery. Why had Hale refused to pay Jack? And why would Hale's murder be tied to something so trivial? The next morning, Rachel paid a visit to Ethan Blake, a private investigator she had worked with years earlier. Ethan's cluttered office smelled faintly of stale coffee and cigarette smoke, but his sharp eyes and quick wit made him the best in the business. "Rachel Miller," Ethan said with a grin, leaning back in his chair. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "It's about Jack Carter," Rachel said, her tone serious. "He's been framed for murder, and I need your help." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Framed, huh? That's a bold claim. Got any proof?" Rachel handed him the repair invoice and explained the circumstances of Jack's arrest. "It doesn't add up, Ethan. The evidence is too perfect. Someone wanted Jack to take the fall." Ethan studied the invoice, his expression unreadable. "Hale was no saint," he said finally. "I've heard whispers about his business dealings, money laundering, bribery, even ties to organized crime. If someone wanted him dead, there's a long list of suspects. Can you dig into his associates? Find out who might have had a motive." Rachel asked. Ethan nodded. I'll see what I can find. But if this is as big as it sounds, we're going to ruffle some feathers. As Ethan began his investigation, Rachel returned home to find Emily waiting for her on the front porch. The little girl's face lit up when she saw Rachel, and she ran to hug her. "Did you find anything?" Emily asked, her voice hopeful. "Not yet, sweetie," Rachel said, crouching to meet Emily's gaze. "But Ethan is going to help us. We're getting closer." Emily nodded, clutching her bear tightly. "I want to help too." Rachel smiled, touched by Emily's determination. "You already are, Emily. Just keep being brave." Meanwhile, Ethan's search led him to a startling discovery. He uncovered records of large payments made to Judge Kane from an offshore account linked to Richard Hale. The amounts were suspiciously large, and the timing coincided with Kane's rulings in several high-profile cases involving Hale's businesses. Ethan called Rachel immediately. "We've got a problem," he said, his tone grim. "Judge Kane is dirty." Rachel's heart sank. "How bad?" "Bad enough to make him a suspect," Ethan replied. "If Hale threatened to expose Kane's corruption, that could be a motive for murder." Rachel's mind raced. Judge Kane was presiding over Jack's trial. If he was involved, the entire case was compromised. But exposing him would be dangerous. "We need proof," Rachel said. "Something concrete that ties him to Hale's murder." "I'll keep digging," Ethan promised. That night, as Rachel prepared for bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The shadows outside the house seemed darker, and every creak of the floorboards made her jump. Emily's small voice broke the silence. "Rachel." "Yes, Emily. Do you think they'll come for us?" Rachel hesitated, then walked over to sit beside Emily on the bed. "No one's going to hurt us, Emily. I promise." But deep down, Rachel knew the stakes were higher than ever. They were unraveling a web of lies, and the people responsible wouldn't go down without a fight. The road ahead was dangerous, but Rachel and Emily were determined to see it through. For Jack, and for the truth. Shadows of corruption. The small town of Willow Springs awoke to a foggy morning, the chill in the air mirroring the tension that gripped its residents. The trial of Jack Carter had captured everyone's attention, polarizing the town into two factions, those who believed in his innocence and those convinced of his guilt. The courtroom was the epicenter of this storm, but behind closed doors, darker forces worked to ensure the truth remained buried. Rachel Miller sat in her kitchen, staring at the documents Ethan Blake had sent her the night before. The evidence against Judge Kane was damning. Offshore accounts, unexplained deposits, and suspicious rulings that had consistently benefited Richard Hale's business empire. Ethan had also uncovered a series of emails between Hale and Kane, cryptic in tone but clear in implication. The judge had been complicit in Hale's shady dealings. Rachel sipped her coffee, her mind racing. The evidence was enough to expose Kane, but getting it into the courtroom would be a challenge. Kane wielded significant influence, and his position as the presiding judge in Jack's trial gave him the power to suppress anything that threatened his interests. Emily's soft voice broke Rachel's thoughts. "Did you find something?" she asked, her wide eyes full of hope. Rachel nodded slowly. "We found something big, Emily. But it's dangerous." Emily's brow furrowed. "Dangerous how?" Rachel hesitated. How could she explain the intricacies of corruption and power to a 7-year-old? "There are people who don't want us to tell the truth," she said finally. "But we're going to do it anyway." Emily nodded, her small hands gripping her stuffed bear. "For Daddy." At Ethan's office, the mood was tense. The private investigator had spent the night piecing together a timeline of Hale's final days, cross-referencing financial records and phone logs. One call stood out, a late-night conversation between Hale and an unknown number just hours before his death. "I traced the number," Ethan said during a phone call with Rachel. "It belongs to a burner phone, but the location pinged near Judge Kane's house." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "That's it. That's the connection we need. Ethan's voice was cautious. It's circumstantial at best. Without a recording or witness, it's not enough to indict him. We need more. Rachel sighed, frustration bubbling under the surface. There has to be something we're missing. There is, Ethan said after a pause. I think Hale recorded his conversations. I found a secure cloud account linked to his phone, but it's locked behind multiple layers of encryption. Rachel's eyes widened. If we can access those recordings, it could be the key to everything. I'm working on it, Ethan assured her, but it's going to take time. Meanwhile, Judge Kane sat in his opulent office, the morning sunlight streaming through the large windows. His calm demeanor belied the storm brewing within. The trial was proceeding according to plan, but the increasing whispers about Rachel Miller and Ethan Blake unnerved him. If they uncovered too much, his carefully constructed facade would crumble. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Come in, Kane said, his tone clipped. A man entered, dressed in a plain black suit. His face was forgettable, but his presence exuded danger. We've got a problem, the man said, closing the door behind him. Kane leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Go on. Blake's digging into Hale's records. If he gets access to the cloud account. He won't, Kane interrupted. It's secure. The man frowned. It's only a matter of time. He's good at what he does. Kane's expression darkened. Then make sure he doesn't have the time. The man nodded, understanding the unspoken command. Consider it handled. That evening, Rachel received a call from Ethan. Rachel, we've got a problem, he said, his voice urgent. Someone's trying to block me from accessing Hale's cloud account. The encryption just got more complex, and I'm being followed. Rachel's grip on the phone tightened. Followed? Are you sure? Positive, Ethan replied. I've noticed the same car tailing me all day. They're trying to scare me off. Rachel's mind raced. You need to be careful. If Kane's involved, he won't stop at intimidation. Ethan chuckled dryly. Careful is my middle name. I've dealt with worse. But Rachel wasn't convinced. She knew Kane's influence ran deep, and if Ethan was a threat to his survival, he wouldn't hesitate to eliminate him. Late that night, Rachel couldn't sleep. The house was quiet except for the faint creaks and groans of the old wood settling. Emily was fast asleep in her room, her stuffed bear tucked under her arm. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the documents Ethan had sent her, looking for anything they might have missed. Suddenly, there was a noise outside, a faint rustling that sent a chill down her spine. She stood, her heart pounding, and peered out the window. The street was empty, but the feeling of being watched lingered. A soft knock at the back door made her jump. She grabbed a kitchen knife and approached cautiously. Who's there? She called out. It's Ethan, came the whispered reply. Rachel opened the door to find Ethan standing there, his face pale and his clothes disheveled. What happened? She asked, ushering him inside. They tried to run me off the road, he said, collapsing into a chair. Whoever's behind this isn't playing around. Rachel set the knife down and poured him a glass of water. Did you get anything? Ethan nodded, pulling a flash drive from his pocket. I cracked part of the cloud account before they locked me out. There are audio files, recordings Hale made. I haven't listened to them yet, but they might be what we need. Rachel's eyes widened. This could blow everything wide open. Ethan nodded grimly. Or paint a bigger target on our backs. As the first rays of dawn broke through the sky, Rachel and Ethan prepared to listen to the files. They sat in the living room, the air thick with anticipation. Emily stirred awake and joined them, sensing the importance of the moment. The first file played static. Then a faint voice emerged. Hale's. His tone was sharp and angry. You think you can scare me, Kane. I know what you've done. Another voice responded, low and menacing. You don't know what you're getting into, Hale. If you ruin me, I'll ruin you first. Rachel's blood ran cold as she recognized the second voice. Judge Kane. Emily's small hand found Rachel's. "Is this going to help, Daddy?" she whispered. Rachel nodded, her resolve hardening. "Yes, Emily. This is going to help Daddy." The fight for Jack Carter's freedom was far from over, but Rachel, Ethan, and Emily were ready to face whatever came next. They had the truth on their side, and they were determined to see justice served, no matter the cost. The battle for truth. The morning sun rose over Willow Springs, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. It was the day of Jack Carter's most critical hearing, and the weight of the moment was palpable. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension as the prosecution prepared to close their case. Every seat was occupied, the murmurs of the townsfolk blending into a low hum of anticipation. Rachel Miller sat in the gallery beside Emily, clutching her purse tightly. Inside was the flash drive containing the damning recording of Judge Kane and Richard Hale. Ethan Blake had managed to extract the file just hours earlier, and Rachel now bore the responsibility of ensuring it reached the court. "Are you ready?" Ethan whispered, leaning close. He sat on her other side, his sharp eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. Rachel nodded, her jaw set, ready as I'll ever be. Emily, perched between them, clutched her stuffed bear with both hands. Her wide eyes flitted nervously around the courtroom, but her resolve was unshaken. "We have to save Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Rachel placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "We will, I promise." At the defendant's table, Jack Carter sat in stoic silence, his hands folded in front of him. The weeks in jail had taken their toll, but his eyes betrayed a glimmer of hope as he glanced toward Rachel and Emily. He trusted Rachel, and seeing his daughter's small figure gave him the strength to endure another day of accusations and scrutiny. The prosecutor, a sharp-dressed man named Douglas Reeves, stood and addressed the court. His tone was confident, his arguments methodical. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, pacing before them, "the evidence against the defendant is overwhelming. His fingerprints were found on the murder weapon. He had a motive, a financial dispute with the victim, and the timeline places him near the scene of the crime." Reeves gestured toward Jack. "This man took Richard Hale's life in a fit of rage, and now he seeks to evade justice. But the evidence does not lie. I urge you to consider the facts and deliver the verdict that justice demands." As Reeves sat down, Jack's public defender, Peter Shaw, rose to his feet. Though clearly overworked and under-resourced, Shaw's determination was evident. "Your Honor," he began, turning to Judge Kane. "The defense requests to present new evidence that has come to light." Judge Kane's expression remained impassive, but Rachel detected a flicker of unease in his eyes. "What evidence?" he asked, his tone curt. Shaw gestured toward Rachel. "Ms. Miller has obtained a recording that is critical to this case. With the court's permission, we'd like to play it." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery. Rachel's heart pounded as she stood, holding the flash drive aloft. All eyes were on her, including Judge Kane's, whose calm facade was beginning to crack. "This recording contains a conversation between Richard Hale and—" Rachel hesitated, then pressed on, her voice steady. "And Judge Kane." The courtroom erupted in gasps. Judge Kane's gavel struck the bench sharply. "Order. I will not allow baseless accusations to disrupt these proceedings." "This is no accusation, Your Honor," Shaw interjected. "The recording is evidence. The jury has the right to hear it." Judge Kane's jaw tightened, his knuckles white as he gripped the gavel. "Approach the bench," he ordered, his voice a low growl. Shaw and the prosecutor approached, and the courtroom held its breath as the three men conferred in hushed tones. Rachel watched anxiously, clutching Emily's hand. After a tense moment, Kane leaned back in his chair. "You may play the recording," he said through gritted teeth. The courtroom fell silent as the recording began to play. Static crackled through the speakers before Hale's voice emerged, clear and confrontational. "You think you can scare me, Kane. I know what you've done. Kane's voice followed, low and menacing. "You don't know what you're getting into, Hale. If you ruin me, I'll ruin you first." The recording continued, revealing snippets of their heated exchange. The words painted a picture of corruption, threats, and a power struggle that had ultimately cost Hale his life. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. The jury sat wide-eyed, the weight of the evidence sinking in. Even Reeves, the prosecutor, looked visibly shaken. Rachel glanced at Judge Kane, whose face was ashen. His carefully constructed facade had crumbled, and the room could see it. "This is outrageous," Kane finally blurted, his voice rising in desperation. "This so-called evidence is inadmissible, obtained illegally, no doubt." Shaw seized the moment. "Your Honor, this recording is a direct indictment of Judge Kane's involvement in this case. His presence here compromises the integrity of the trial." Gasps erupted again as federal agents entered the courtroom. The lead agent, a woman with a badge clipped to her belt, addressed Kane. "Judge Edwin Kane, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and the murder of Richard Hale." Chaos ensued as Kane was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, his protests drowned out by the murmurs and shouts of the gallery. Emily clung to Rachel, her small face buried against Rachel's arm. With Kane removed from the bench, another judge was swiftly appointed to oversee the remainder of the trial. Shaw wasted no time arguing for Jack's innocence, highlighting the new evidence and its implications. By the end of the day, the jury reached a unanimous decision. Jack Carter was not guilty. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack stepped out of the courthouse a free man. The crowd outside erupted in applause and cheers, but his focus was solely on Emily, who ran into his arms with a cry of "Daddy." Jack held her tightly, tears streaming down his face. "I missed you so much," he whispered. Rachel stood nearby, her own eyes glistening with tears. Jack approached her, Emily still in his arms. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to," Rachel replied. "You're home. That's all that matters." But Rachel knew their fight wasn't over. The exposure of Judge Kane's corruption was just the beginning. The network of lies and deceit that Hale and Kane had built would take time to dismantle. Still, for now, justice had prevailed, and Jack Carter was finally free. Unveiling the depths of deception. The courthouse steps were still buzzing with activity, even hours after Jack Carter's acquittal. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras capturing every angle of the celebration. Inside the courthouse, the wheels of justice continued to turn, as federal agents worked to piece together the far-reaching web of corruption Judge Kane had carefully spun over the years. But for Jack, Rachel, and Emily, the fight wasn't over. The recording may have cleared Jack's name, but it had also opened a Pandora's box of secrets. Hale's murder was just one thread in a tapestry of deception that threatened to entangle anyone who got too close. That evening, the Carter home was filled with an unfamiliar warmth. For the first time in weeks, Jack, Emily, and Rachel sat around the dinner table, sharing a meal that felt like a victory feast. Emily couldn't stop smiling as she recounted every detail of the trial to her father, her animated gestures bringing life back into the once hollow house. Jack listened with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "I can't believe you stood up in that courtroom. Em, you're the bravest person I know." Emily beamed. "Rachel told me to be brave, and I knew you didn't do it." Rachel, who had been quietly sipping her tea, smiled softly. "She's a fighter, Jack, just like you." But beneath the joy of reunion, Rachel's mind was already at work. The revelations about Kane had raised more questions than answers. Who else was involved in the conspiracy? And how deep did it go? Later that night, as the house fell silent, Rachel stepped outside to take a call from Ethan Blake. The private investigator's voice crackled through the line, urgency evident in his tone. "Rachel, I've been digging into Hale's financial records. The offshore accounts linked to cocaine aren't the only ones. There are connections to at least 3 other prominent figures in town." Rachel's stomach tightened. Who? Mayor Dalton, Police Chief Reeves, and get this, a major construction firm, McAllister and Sons. They've all benefited from transactions tied to Hale's laundering schemes. Rachel's grip on the phone tightened. This isn't just about Kane. It's the entire system. Ethan sighed. Exactly. And now that Kane's gone, they'll be scrambling to cover their tracks. If we're going to take them down, we need to move fast. Rachel nodded, her mind racing. I'll meet you in the morning. We need a plan. The next day, Rachel and Ethan met at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. The cafe's quiet, unassuming atmosphere made it the perfect place for their clandestine meeting. Ethan spread a series of documents across the table, each one a piece of the puzzle they were trying to solve. This is where it gets tricky, Ethan said, pointing to a series of bank statements. These show large deposits into accounts tied to Dalton, Reeves, and McAllister, but the money trails are deliberately obscured. Whoever set this up knew what they were doing. Rachel frowned. What about Hale's cloud account? Are there more recordings? Ethan shook his head. Not yet, but I did find something else. A series of encrypted emails between Hale and a man named Victor Langley. Who's Langley? Rachel asked. A high-level fixer, Ethan explained. He specializes in making problems disappear. If Hale hired him, it's possible Langley knows more about what was going on. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Can we find him? Ethan hesitated. That's the problem. Langley doesn't want to be found. But if he's connected to Hale, someone in his circle might know where he is. While Ethan worked on tracking Langley, Rachel returned to the Carter home to share the latest developments with Jack. Sitting in the living room, she laid out the documents Ethan had uncovered. This isn't just about you, Jack, she said. Hale's murder was part of a much bigger operation. Kane, Hale, and now these others. They were all connected. Jack leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. I just wanted to fix things, Rachel. I never thought my name would be caught up in something like this. Rachel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You were their scapegoat, Jack. But now we have the chance to expose them all. Emily, who had been quietly listening from the doorway, stepped forward. What can I do to help? Jack smiled, his heart swelling with pride. You've done enough. Just knowing you believe in me is more than I could ever ask for. That night, Ethan's investigation bore fruit. He called Rachel with a lead on Victor Langley, a contact in Hale's former company. Prestige Ventures had hinted at Langley's involvement in a recent real estate deal in a nearby city. This could be our chance, Ethan said, but it's risky. Langley's dangerous, and if he knows we're coming, he won't hesitate to protect himself. Rachel didn't hesitate. We've come this far. We can't stop now. The next morning, Rachel and Ethan set off to find Langley. Their destination was a sleek, high-rise building in the heart of the city, a stark contrast to the humble streets of Willow Springs. The building was home to several luxury apartments, one of which was rumored to belong to Langley. The confrontation was tense. When Langley opened the door to his apartment, his piercing eyes immediately assessed the situation. You've got the wrong place, he said curtly, beginning to close the door. But Ethan wedged his foot in the frame. We know who you are, Langley. And we know what you did for Hale. Langley's expression hardened. You have no idea what you're talking about. Rachel stepped forward, holding up a copy of the encrypted emails. These say otherwise. You helped Kane and Hale build their empire, and now it's all falling apart. Langley's eyes flickered with something. Fear, perhaps, but he quickly masked it. You're playing a dangerous game. So are you, Rachel shot back. But we're not here to play. We're here for the truth. For a long moment, the three of them stood in silence, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Then, finally, Langley sighed. If I talk, I want immunity. We'll see what we can do, Ethan said. But you better give us something solid. Langley nodded slowly. Kane wasn't the only one pulling strings. Hale had partners, people who made sure the money kept flowing. If you want to take them down, you'll need more than this. You'll need proof they can't deny. Rachel's heart pounded. They were closer than ever to unraveling the conspiracy, but with each step forward, the stakes grew higher. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous the game became. And the real battle was only just beginning. The final reckoning. The gray morning sky over Willow Springs was a fitting backdrop for the storm brewing within its halls of power. With Victor Langley's reluctant cooperation, Rachel Miller and Ethan Blake had uncovered a deeper layer of the conspiracy that had ensnared Jack Carter. Langley's information painted a picture of a sprawling network of corruption, implicating powerful figures who had long escaped scrutiny. The stakes had never been higher. The evidence Rachel and Ethan now possessed could bring down the entire network, but they knew their enemies would stop at nothing to protect themselves. Time was running out, and the risks were mounting. Rachel paced in Ethan's office, her hands gripping a stack of files tightly. "Langley gave us everything we needed," she said, her voice firm but laced with urgency. "But we can't sit on this. If we don't act now, they'll bury us before we can expose them." Ethan nodded, his face grim. "I've already sent copies of the documents to a few trusted contacts in the media. If anything happens to us, the story will still get out." Rachel paused, absorbing the gravity of his words. "Do you think they'll come after us?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "If they know what we have, they will. But we're not going down without a fight." Rachel's mind turned to Emily and Jack, both waiting anxiously at home. The thought of putting them in danger filled her with dread, but she knew there was no turning back. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. The following morning, Rachel, Ethan, and Langley met in a secure location, a warehouse on the outskirts of town. Langley had provided a trove of documents, emails, and financial records that detailed the full extent of the corruption. The evidence implicated Mayor Dalton, Police Chief Reeves, and McAllister and Sons Construction, among others. "This is it," Ethan said, spreading the files across a makeshift table. "This is the smoking gun." Langley, standing off to the side, looked uneasy. "You don't understand how deep this goes," he warned. "These people have resources, connections. They can make you disappear." Rachel fixed him with a steely gaze. "And that's why we can't stop. They've gotten away with this for too long." Ethan nodded in agreement. "We need to make a public move, something they can't suppress. A press conference." Langley scoffed. "You think a press conference is going to stop them? They'll just spin it, discredit you, and keep doing what they've always done." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Not if we have witnesses. Not if we have you." Langley hesitated, fear flickering across his face. "I'm not suicidal." "Then help us ensure the truth gets out," Rachel said firmly. "This isn't just about us. It's about everyone they've hurt." Langley remained silent, but his expression softened slightly, a glimmer of guilt visible beneath his guarded exterior. The press conference was set for the next day at the courthouse steps. Ethan's media contacts had ensured maximum coverage, and reporters from across the state were already descending on Willow Springs. The plan was simple but risky: present the evidence, name the guilty parties, and force the authorities to act under the scrutiny of the public eye. As Rachel prepared her statements, Jack approached her, his face lined with worry. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "What if they come after you?" Rachel placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "They've already come after us, Jack. We can't let them win. This is our chance to make things right." Emily, who had been quietly listening from the doorway, stepped forward. "You'll be brave, right, Rachel? Like you told me to be." Rachel knelt down to Emily's level, a soft smile on her face. "Yes, Emily, I'll be brave. For you, for your dad, for everyone who deserves the truth." The courthouse steps were packed with reporters and spectators as Rachel stepped up to the podium. Cameras flashed, and the crowd murmured with anticipation. Beside her stood Ethan and Langley, both tense but resolute. Rachel took a deep breath, gripping the edges of the podium. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady. "We are here today to expose a conspiracy that has plagued our town for years, a conspiracy that has taken lives, destroyed reputations, and corrupted the very institutions meant to protect us." She outlined the evidence methodically, presenting the financial records, emails, and recordings that implicated Mayor Dalton, Chief Reeves, and McAllister and Sons. Each piece of evidence was displayed on a large screen behind her, leaving no room for doubt. "These men abused their power for personal gain," Rachel continued, "and when Richard Hale threatened to expose them, they silenced him and tried to frame an innocent man for their crime." The crowd gasped as Rachel played the recordings Langley had provided, including a heated phone call between Hale and Mayor Dalton, in which the mayor threatened Hale to stay in line or face the consequences. Ethan stepped forward next. "We've handed over all this evidence to federal authorities. This isn't just a local issue, it's a national disgrace." Langley, visibly nervous, took the microphone. "I was part of this," he admitted, his voice shaking. "I helped them cover their tracks, silence their enemies. But I'm done hiding. I'm here to tell the truth." As the press conference unfolded, chaos erupted elsewhere in Willow Springs. Federal agents raided the homes and offices of Dalton, Reeves, and the McAllister executives, armed with warrants based on the evidence Rachel and Ethan had provided. News of the raid spread quickly, adding fuel to the firestorm. Back at the courthouse, the crowd broke into applause as Rachel concluded her statement. But the victory was short-lived. As she stepped down from the podium, a black SUV screeched to a halt nearby. Two men in dark suits emerged, their intentions clear. "Get down," Ethan shouted, pulling Rachel and Langley to the ground as gunfire erupted. The crowd scattered, screams echoing through the square. Amid the chaos, federal agents arrived, engaging the assailants and neutralizing the threat. Rachel, shaken but unharmed, clutched Emily tightly as Jack rushed to their side. The aftermath of the press conference was a whirlwind of arrests, media coverage, and legal proceedings. Dalton, Reeves, and the others were charged with a litany of crimes, and their network of corruption began to unravel. Langley, under federal protection, became a key witness in the case. For Jack, Rachel, and Emily, life slowly returned to normal. The Carter home, once filled with fear and uncertainty, was now a place of healing and hope. One evening, as the family sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emily turned to Rachel. "You were really brave, Rachel." Rachel smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "So were you, Emily. We all were." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the three of them sat together, knowing they had not only cleared Jack's name, but also brought justice to a town that desperately needed it. They had fought against the darkness and emerged victorious, their courage and determination lighting the way forward. The quiet after the storm felt surreal. The sprawling network of corruption that had once held Willow Springs in its grip was now crumbling. Federal agents continued their investigations, uncovering more hidden accounts, fraudulent transactions, and complicit individuals. The town, stunned by the revelations, began to reckon with the betrayal of those they had trusted the most. For Rachel, Ethan, and Jack, the end of the battle didn't feel like a moment of triumph. Instead, it was a mix of relief, exhaustion, and a lingering unease. Justice had been served, but the scars left behind by the fight would take time to heal. 2 weeks after the press conference, Rachel stood at the courthouse steps once again, but this time the atmosphere was different. The town had gathered for a ceremony honoring those who had stood up against the corruption. Jack was by her side, his arm around Emily, who clutched her stuffed bear tightly. The mayor pro tem, a woman named Susan Fletcher, who had taken over after Dalton's arrest, addressed the crowd. "Today, we honor the courage of those who refuse to stay silent. Rachel Miller, Ethan Blake, and Jack Carter stood up for truth and justice when it mattered most. They remind us that even in the darkest times, light can prevail. The crowd applauded, their cheers resonating through the square. Rachel felt a swell of pride as Emily looked up at her, beaming. As Susan presented Rachel with a plaque recognizing her bravery, Rachel took the microphone to say a few words. "This isn't just about what we did," she began, her voice steady. "It's about all of us. The community, the people who refuse to look the other way. Willow Springs was hurt by corruption, but it's also healing because of those who chose to fight back." She glanced at Jack and Emily. "We've proven that no one is too small to make a difference. And as we move forward, I hope this town will continue to stand up for what's right." Later that evening, the Carter home was filled with laughter and light as friends and neighbors gathered to celebrate. It was the first time in months that Jack truly felt free, surrounded by people who believed in him. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, watching the scene with a rare smile. "You've got a good family, Jack," he said. Jack nodded. "I do. And we owe a lot of that to you and Rachel." Rachel, who was helping Emily arrange plates of cookies, overheard and joined the conversation. "It wasn't just us, Jack. You never gave up. And Emily," she smiled warmly at the little girl, "she's the real hero." Emily looked up, her cheeks turning pink. "I just wanted everyone to know Daddy didn't do it. And you made sure they did," Ethan said with a grin. As the night wound down, Rachel stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The cool evening air was refreshing, and the stars above seemed brighter than they had in weeks. Jack joined her, a cup of coffee in hand. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked. Rachel smiled faintly, "Just thinking about how far we've come. It feels surreal." Jack nodded. "It does. I keep expecting to wake up and find it's all been a dream." "It's not a dream," Rachel said firmly. "You're free. Emily's safe, and the people who did this to you are finally facing justice." Jack exhaled deeply, his shoulders relaxing. "I couldn't have done it without you, Rachel. You fought for me when no one else would." Rachel looked at him, her eyes soft. "You deserved someone to fight for you, Jack. You and Emily both." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the lights of the town twinkle in the distance. For the first time in a long time, Willow Springs felt like a place of hope. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a new normal. Jack returned to his work as a handyman, his name now synonymous with resilience and integrity. Rachel found herself drawn deeper into community advocacy, using her newfound platform to push for reforms that would prevent such corruption from ever taking root again. Ethan, true to form, moved on to his next case, but he remained a trusted friend and ally, always just a phone call away. As for Emily, she thrived. The shadows of the past began to fade, replaced by the light of a brighter future. She often drew pictures of her family, herself, her father, and Rachel, standing together, surrounded by sunshine and flowers. One evening, as the three of them sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emily turned to Rachel. "Are we going to be okay now?" Rachel smiled, pulling the little girl close. "We're going to be better than okay, Emily. We're going to be happy." Jack nodded, his voice steady. "We've got each other. That's all we need." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson, the Carter family looked ahead with hope, knowing that their journey, though fraught with challenges, had made them stronger, braver, and more united than ever. They had faced the storm and come out victorious, and now they were ready to embrace the peace that followed.